Chap, you just shared with us a really important insight about the distinction between an attitude of adoption versus an attitude of assimilation with marginalized cultures. Let's press that a little bit. For you, what is the theological ground of that theological category, the affect of that theological category?
Well, and how it works out when we actually do youth ministry. I think the best way for me to begin with that one is to kind of share my own journey in becoming more and more aware that the world that I have experienced is not the world in its fullness. And yet, as I grew up, like all of us at some level, the lens through which I see everything becomes the only truth that I know. And therefore, the way that I was raised, the language we used, the conversations we had, the assumptions that I carried into my life, where I kind of thought, well, of course you all agree with me because this is kind of my assumptions. And that's kind of the nature of how we are when we get into kind of a closed system of a people group. And I, as clearly, obviously, a white guy in upper middle class American, raised that way, so easy for me to forget or not even know and understand what somebody of a different ethnicity or a different gender could have any notion of life. They may not, I could say one word or one sentence out of my mouth, and they have a completely different experience of that sentence or that word alone. And that's been a journey for me to, it's hard. I hate it because most of the time I kind of go, I want to be right. Come on. Just on this one, can you just agree with me, please? But you carry that into theologically. When Paul's making the argument of moving, that we're grafted in to God's people. And all of that interesting language that's very difficult in Romans 9, 10, 11. But there's something about being adopted into God's family that I too am an adopted, not only person, but I come from a different place than those who were God's people at first. And so as I'm drawn in, there's this beautiful weaving of a tapestry in God's redemptive plan that occurs. And it's not limited to ethnicity or socioeconomics. It can be a whole lot of things. It's gender. It's kind of, it can be geographic, what part of the country you're from. So when you take the youth ministry, almost all of us doing youth ministry now, we need to have kind of a global perspective that ours is not the only way of thinking. That other people have different ways of thinking. And as kids come in, they're not aware of these conversations theoretically. But if you have an African American that's in your youth group and you're a white person, the words you say, you got to be careful. You need to ask for help, not from that kid. Do not burden kids with this, but get other people to help you understand that adoption means I am seeking to understand and receive and change because of your perspective. Because I've had to do that in order to be adopted into the body of Christ. So all of us are the same, and we gotta let go of our own perceptions, especially when we're more dominant, and receive from one another. If you're female, you don't understand what it's like to be a boy who's 16, and that's okay. But learn from the boys who are 16 and the other men. So whatever the issue is, whether it's gender or ethnicity or socioeconomics, we all, and this is the whole idea of adoption, we all are longing for being drawn into God's tapestry that He's weaving. And He, by His grace, will do that as we drop our walls, as we drop our perceptions and lay them at the feet of Christ and care for one another.